give me your overall thoughts on how you see the Bills approaching this draft.
It's kind of tough, right? Because the Bills, a few years ago, that was probably the best Bills team in a generation. And then they lost, I think it was what, like seven out of their eight captains. And everybody was kind of panicking a little bit. And I said at the time, like, hey, this team still has a lot of juice to it. They just have to nail their offseason and nail the draft, and they could very easily replenish and go on another run here. And they did. They drafted some really nice young pieces, and they kind of brought about another generation within this overall Josh Allen window, and they got really darn close last year. In fact, I think if they beat Denver, they very easily could have made the Super Bowl. Unfortunately for Bills fans, that's a story that we hear basically every year of like, oh, if they just won that one playoff game, they probably would have won the whole thing. And so I don't necessarily think they're in a terrible spot here, but there are a few finishing pieces that they need to grab, right? I think they finally need to have a long-term answer at edge. They kind of keep bringing in guys, veterans on their last legs to try to, bring them some magic, and it just hasn't really worked out like they've wanted it to. Defensive tackle, like they're not completely out of options at DT, but it feels like they've never really had the guy who can kind of completely, really like the piece to kind of build your run defense around. They've always had guys that were okay against the run, but other than Daquan Jones, they've never really had anybody that was dominant against the run, and they've paid for that in the past. Receiver may or may not be okay after the DJ Moore acquisition. Running back is obviously great. Offensive line, we could just find a new left guard. Like they're not that far off, but it's just a couple little finishing pieces that they need. So I'm looking at edge. I'm looking at DT. If there's another receiver that they like that falls, I could see them even going for it again and just trying to get four deep at that spot. They're not that far away. And I kind of see some of the moves that they made this year, like bringing in Bradley Chubb as just kind of them doing the same thing that they've done for a while. I kind of want to build on that and just almost like go like a shotgun approach and just fix these issues once and for all.
So, with the 26th overall pick, and knowing what you know in terms of this draft's depth and quality, etc., what would be for them, you think, as close to a first round value if they went there, given the spots you addressed?
I would probably look at, TJ Parker out of Clemson. I talked to him at the combine, really bright young man. I think he would fit in well in Buffalo, but he also profiles as a power rusher, which is something that historically has been very successful in the NFL. If you're looking at the aggregate measurement of every top 10 edge rusher as far as pressures in the NFL for the last decade, they basically look exactly like TJ Parker, right? 6'3", low 260s, 33.5-inch arms, probably about 60th percentile explosion score, but having the ability to rush with power. And he actually stayed at Clemson despite getting offers for more money elsewhere. He stayed at Clemson because he wanted to be coached by Chris Rumph, who was their edge coaches at Clemson. He's somebody who coached Khalil Mack in the league, Daniil Hunter, Whitney Merciless, all of these guys that look like TJ Parker. He wanted to develop an NFL skill set. I think there's a decent shot he's going to be there for Buffalo's pick in the late first round. And I think he would give them like a true young, potentially dominant in the future power rusher. He's nowhere near his ceiling. And culturally, I think he's a really good fit too. I think he's a really hard worker. He's a great kid. Town would love him. And, better than having two edge rushers, having three, in my opinion. And they might need four if they really want to finish this thing off.
If they stay put without a second round pick, and then you get to now the third round, strategically, and you could address this from two ways. Could they stay put and say go for another need spot? Is there enough depth to make that work, potentially work in round three? Or do you think it's going to require some maneuvering to perhaps get that second round back, pick back in order to do something else? And I'd like to know what you think the next important thing would be after the inside D lineman.
Yeah, I think day two is kind of the sweet spot here. So, they already gave up one of their D2 or day two picks just to get receiver out of the way already. Like, I think that that was basically them saying, we don't think the receiver that we like in the first round is going to be there. So we're just going to take care of that with a round two pick. Financially, it's not like the best thing, but again, they're in a window. They don't necessarily care about that. They're really trying to go for it now. So okay, we're going to take care of receiver on day two. We think we can get the edge that we're looking for on day one. Later on day two, the world's their oyster, right? If there's one of the many linebackers or safeties that they just see as a value that falls in round three, which is potentially very possible. There's a bunch of value defensive tackles, like say like Dominique Orange or Proctor, that's going to be there. Different flavors of DT, but like they can get one there as well. And if you're looking for like a true outside X receiver, which I still don't really think they have on the roster. DJ Moore, not necessarily an X. Khalil Shakir, obviously not really an X. Josh Palmer, he can do it. It's not really his best role here. I would look at like a Ted Hurst, right? Somebody who's probably going to be there in the third round. He's big, he's long. He also faced more snaps against press coverage as an X receiver than almost everybody in this class. In fact, the Indiana kids didn't even pass him in terms of snaps against press coverage until a national championship game. They played like 5 extra games than him. So he's very experienced against press. He's got the size they look for. And since Keon Coleman hasn't really worked out yet, I just kind of keep wanting to bring guys into that role until they find somebody who can do it because they haven't really had it in a long time.
This is said to be a defensive driven draft for the most part, right? With the types of players that are there, we never know how that goes. But in terms of what the Bills have to do, which is rebuild a defense to a 3-4 model, it feels to me like throughout this draft, this is how you're going to try to go about it. And in your mind, is this the kind of draft that lends itself to those type of athletes?
It's interesting the 4-3 versus 3-4 discussion, right? Because if you're looking at the modern NFL, it's kind of the same thing no matter what. You're really only going to see a major difference in a 3-4 versus a 4-3 when you're in base personnel, which most teams, on average, they might only be in base like 25% of the time, maybe 30% of the time. If you look at Seattle, they were in nickel and dime 90% of the time just because they could, no matter what the offense was in, right? So the 3-4 versus 4-3 thing really only matters on like early downs in between the 20s, and that's only in the offense is has multiple tight ends or a fullback on the field. Other than that, it's largely going to look the same thing as like a 4-3 base team, right? You're going to have 4 guys in the line of scrimmage, sometimes 5 if you're trying to show blitz or even bring a blitz, and you're going to have two off ball linebackers, and you're going to have 5 DBs. That is generally how the Bills defense has operated for a long time because they had the luxury of like great safeties and a great nickel and Tehran and Micah and Jordan and all those guys. Like they could get away with playing nickel against base. I still think they're going to play a bunch of nickel against base here. It's just they're going to have a few more downs per game where they're going to have 3 big bodies on the field. Right now, it's going to be Sanders, Walker, and Oliver. I still think they could add one in the draft, but it's not going to like really change the defense that much. It's really more of like a situational extra body, and maybe we might see like 10 snaps a game if I had to guess.